Picture the scene. You're having dinner at an ordinary restaurant in an ordinary city. On a night that seemed completely ordinary, across the table, your brother. Two people who traveled from another country just to sit with you. And in your glass, cranberry juice. You take a sip. Something is wrong, a pain, sudden, unlike anything you've ever felt before. You stand up, push the chair back, run toward the exit. Your brother follows. And in the parking lot, with the cold night air hitting your face, you turn to him, eyes wide open, breath failing, and say the last 4 words of your life. They poisoned me. Stanley Meyer died at 57 years old. Official cause, cerebral aneurysm. High blood pressure, case closed. Folder shut. Rubber band on top. But what Stanley Meyer left behind didn't fit inside any folder. He claimed to have discovered how to run a car on tap water, not on gasoline, not on electricity, not on ethanol, on water. And if he was right, the world you live in today would be completely different. This is the story that isn't told. Not with this depth, not with all the evidence, not with the names, the documents, the demonstrations made in front of Navy admirals and engineering professors. Today we go deep into the technology, into the power structures, into the forces that control what you pay every time you fill up your tank, and into the question that never leaves anyone who seriously researches this case. What if he was getting too close? Before we continue, I need to pause for a second, because what you're about to hear over the next few minutes is not the version of this story that circulates out there. This goes deeper, into the patents, into the military demonstrations, into the names of people who saw the technology work with their own eyes and what happened to them afterward. This channel exists exactly for this. The stories that powerful people hope you never find. The unseen key, the invisible key. Think about what a key does. It doesn't shout. It doesn't fight. It simply opens what was locked. Subscribe now, hit the bell. Because every video on this channel is a new key, and you're going to want all of them. And if this story matters to you, leave a like. It tells the algorithm this truth deserves to be seen. Now, let's open the next door. Before we talk about the invention, we need to talk about the inventor. Stanley Meyer was born on August 24, 1940, in Grove City, Ohio, a small town, a working-class life in post-war America. He and his twin brother Stephen Meyer grew up with the kind of curiosity that takes everything apart just to understand how it works. They built contraptions. They created gadgets. They figured things out on their own. Stanley had no degree in physics or engineering. And that matters because it's the easiest argument they use against him. But it's also one of the most revealing things about who he was. He was never conditioned to believe that certain things were impossible. Throughout his adult life, Meyer worked on multiple fronts. He developed cardiac monitors for medical use. He created validation systems for banks. He worked on oceanography projects. And here's something almost nobody mentions. He contributed to the Strategic Defense Initiative program, known as Star Wars. President Reagan's ambitious anti-missile shield. That detail disappears from most accounts of Stanley Meyer. But it's there in the very documents he published. This man was not some ordinary garage inventor. He was someone the American government had already trusted with sensitive work. Then the 70s arrive. The Arab oil embargo of 1973 hits the United States like a punch. Gas stations close. Fuel is rationed. The economy stalls. Lines stretch for miles. People wait hours just to fill up. The country is exposed, vulnerable, held hostage by a substance that comes from the other side of the planet. And Stanley Meyer starts asking a question that millions of people were asking, but that almost nobody was willing to truly pursue. What if we didn't need oil? That question consumed the next 28 years of his life. It generated patents. It generated demonstrations in front of admirals and university professors. It generated a BBC documentary. It brought American military interest right to his front door. And then, It erased him. But before we talk about the erasure, we need to talk about the invention. Because without truly understanding what he built, deeply honestly, you won't be able to measure the scale of what was lost. Let's do something that isn't common. When people talk about Stanley Meyer, let's actually explain the technology. Without exaggeration, but without dismissal. Because the science here is more real than most people imagine. First, the basics. Water is H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen. If you can break that molecule apart, you release hydrogen, which is fuel. When hydrogen burns, it recombines with oxygen and turns back into water. Clean, 0 emissions. A closed loop. The problem? Breaking water normally requires more energy than you get from burning the hydrogen. That's classical electrolysis. You spend more than you gain. Meyer claimed to have solved that problem. Not through brute force, but through resonance. Think of it this way. You don't need to shout to shatter a crystal glass. You only need to find the right frequency, the natural vibration frequency of that specific object, and then let the resonance do the work for you. Meyer applied that principle to the water molecule. He developed what he called the water fuel cell, an electrolytic cell that used carefully tuned, high-frequency electrical pulses to make the H2O molecule vibrate until it shattered apart. Not with raw direct current, but with a specific resonant frequency. The circuit he created, the VIC voltage intensifier circuit, was designed to amplify voltage without proportionally increasing current. A voltage low current resonant pulses. The claimed result, production of hydrogen and oxygen at a fraction of the energy that classical electrolysis would require. Meyer filed multiple patents in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Canada. Those patents exist. You can read them today. They describe the mechanism with real engineering detail, and he didn't just describe it. He demonstrated it. There is a 1995 BBC documentary where Meyer shows the cell operating. There are accounts of demonstrations in front of American Navy engineers. There is a car, a dune buggy, that he drove around Ohio claiming it ran exclusively on tap water. The scientists who examined the invention were divided. Some came away convinced that something real was happening. Others left skeptical, arguing that Meyer refused to allow precise measurements of energy input and output. That refusal will matter later, much more than you'd think. But here is what isn't disputed. The underlying science has real grounding. Resonant electrolysis is a legitimate field of research. Academic papers published decades after Meyer explore similar principles. The idea that specific frequencies can increase the efficiency of water dissociation is not science fiction. The debate isn't, is this possible? The debate is, did Meyer actually achieve it? And to what degree? And that subtle distinction is exactly where the official narrative becomes more convenient than honest. Something was happening in that laboratory in Grove City, Ohio. To understand what happened to Stanley Meyer, you need to understand the scale of what he was threatening. Not a company, not an industry, an entire civilization. Oil isn't just fuel. It's plastic, it's fertilizer, it's asphalt, it's medicine. It's the material foundation of the modern world. It's estimated that around 6,000 different products are derived from oil, and the global fossil fuel industry moves somewhere between $5 and $7 trillion a year. 7 trillion. Per year, numbers like that stop making sense. So let's make it real. It's enough money to eradicate extreme global poverty, estimated at around $175 billion per year, 40 times over. Every single year, it's enough to fund NASA's entire budget for more than 300 years. In a single year, that is the engine of the world economy. And it runs on a single substance. And it's not just money, it's power. Wars have been fought over oil. Democracies have been bought with oil money. Dictatorships have been sustained and protected by petroleum interests. The entire geopolitical architecture of the 20th century was, in large part, the architecture of whoever controlled access to oil. The Arab embargo of 1973 brought the United States to its knees. The Gulf War, the invasion of Iraq, the complex relationship between Washington and Riyadh that defined American foreign policy for decades, it all orbits around the same substance that Meyer claimed he could replace with tap water. Now imagine what happens to that system if Meyer's technology were real and scalable. It's not just that the oil giants lose revenue, it's that the entire architecture of global power, who has influence, who controls access to resources, who can use energy as a geopolitical lever, collapses. Countries without oil become independent. Countries with oil lose their bargaining chip. Conflicts that exist because they control supply routes or specific reserves cease to have a reason to exist. Climate change doesn't disappear, but its trajectory is fundamentally different. 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions driving global warming come from fossil fuels. Remove that and the curve bends drastically. This is not science fiction. That was what was at stake. And that's why, regardless of whether the technology was real or not, the people whose fortunes depend on the status quo had every incentive in the world to make sure it never became real. You don't need an elaborate conspiracy for that. You just need money, lawyers, regulatory capture, and patience. You just need to make sure the light never reaches the exit. Now let's get to the material that doesn't circulate in the simplified narratives. The buried details that complicate the official version in ways the system would prefer you never stop to think about. The car disappeared. Meyer's buggy, the one with water-powered car, painted on the side, the same one from the BBC documentary, was sealed in a room right after his death. No windows, no access. 16 years later, in 2014, it resurfaced in Canada, apparently sold by Stanley's brother, Stanley Meyer, to a family called Holbrook, described as a former associate of Stanley's. Since then, complete silence. No verifiable access. No independent examination. If the technology was a fraud, why does the car matter enough to be hidden? If it was real, why wasn't it open to the world? The silence surrounding that vehicle is already an answer. The patents exist, but the key may have died with him. The establishment uses this as proof that the technology never worked. But there's another way to read it. The patents describe principles and designs, but Meyer was known for keeping critical implementation details close to his chest. The exact tuning of the resonant frequency, the specific VIC circuit configuration that produced the anomalous results. Details he never fully disclosed, not even in the patents. He was afraid. Chronically, genuinely afraid of having his work stolen before he could deliver it to the world with his own hands. And so the patents exist, but the key that makes the work may have died with him, the unseen. For real, the demonstrations for military officials. And what happened afterward? Accounts from inside Meyer's circle describe a pattern. Whenever a real institutional interest got close, when military representatives arrived, when serious money started to move, something intervened. Regulatory pressure, legal challenges, funding that mysteriously dried up. The American IRS reportedly accessed and drained a foreign bank account tied to Meyer's operation, an allegation that, if true, represents extraordinary government interference. Meyer didn't just face skepticism. He faced systematic pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. That is not bad luck. That is a coordinated response to a perceived threat. In 1996, 2 years before his death, Stanley Meyer sat in a courtroom. Two investors who had purchased franchises from his water fuel cell operations sued him, alleging fraud. The court appointed 3 experts to examine the technology, and they ruled against Meyer. The court found him guilty of gross and flagrant fraud. Let's be honest about that moment, because this channel doesn't hide evidence. We bring you the full picture so you can see it clearly, but we're also going to tell you what that trial actually was and what it wasn't. The experts concluded that the cell, as they examined it, did not produce more energy than was put in. They found no violation of the laws of thermodynamics. What they could not, and were unable to, definitively determine was whether Meyer's device, under his specific implementation, produced results that classical electrolysis couldn't fully explain. Because Meyer refused to allow the one test that would have settled everything, a clean, instrumented measurement of the energy input-to-output ratio under controlled conditions. He refused, and that refusal, deeply frustrating and ultimately damaging to him, came from a man who had watched repeatedly how the system works, how patents get stolen, how technologies get absorbed and buried, how inventors lose control of the one thing they dedicated their lives to. He was afraid. Chronically, genuinely afraid. But here's what matters to understand about that trial. The case also did something more subtle. It framed the narrative permanently. From 1996 onward, every mainstream media mention of Stanley Meyer came with the qualifier, declared fraudulent by a court. Two words that collapsed 20 years of patents, demonstrations, and documented testimony into a single dismissal. That's how the system works. You don't need to silence someone with violence, though that may come later. First, you let the courts do the work. March 20th, 1998, Grove City, Ohio, a Cracker Barrel restaurant. The kind of place so ordinary, it barely registers. Which may be exactly the point. Stanley Meyer is having dinner with his brother Stephen and two men described as Belgian investors. People who traveled from outside the country specifically to meet with him. There was serious money on the table that night. The kind of investment that could finally give scale to the project that had consumed 3 decades of Stanley's life. And then Stanley Meyer drinks from his cranberry juice. Seconds later, he is ill. He runs out to the parking lot. Stephen follows. In the cold Ohio night, Stanley turns to his twin brother, the man who grew up with him, who worked with him, who shared that obsession for decades, and says, "They poisoned me," and dies, the official cause, cerebral aneurysm. High blood pressure. Natural death, 57 years old. No significant documented cardiac history. Dies at a dinner with foreign strangers at the exact moment his work was on the verge of receiving serious international funding. The toxicology report found nothing. But here is what we know for certain. We know the buggy was sealed and hidden. We know that a man who dedicated his life to something that threatened one of the most powerful industries in human history died suddenly, publicly, violently in a parking lot, at exactly the moment his work was reaching an inflection point. Was he poisoned? Toxicology said no, but toxicology detects known poisons. There are compounds, documented in intelligence research, that can trigger cerebrovascular events that present as natural, causes and leave no trace in standard examinations. We are not saying that is what happened. We are saying the official explanation is medically convenient. The timing is historically extraordinary, and the pattern of what followed, the suppression, the seizures, the silence, looks less like a system mourning a fraudster and more like a system neutralizing a threat. The last words of a man who knew exactly what he was dealing with. They poisoned me. The cruelest part of Stanley Meyer's story isn't the death, it's what the death prevented. Because here's the irony the establishment cannot erase. The central principle of Meyer's work, hydrogen from water as clean fuel, is today mainstream science. It has a name. It has government funding. It has international agreements tied to it. It's called green hydrogen. And experts say it could dominate global fuel markets within the next decade. Toyota sells the Mirai, a hydrogen fuel cell car, commercially. Hyundai sells the Nexo. BMW has demonstrated hydrogen versions of its luxury cars. The US Department of Energy has poured billions into hydrogen. Research. The scientific community that ridiculed Meyer in the 90s is now racing toward the finish line he was trying to reach 20 years earlier. The difference between then and now is not the science. The difference is the money. The difference is that oil had to get expensive enough, and the political cost of climate change had to become undeniable enough. Before the industry was given permission to pivot, the transition is happening now, slowly, expensively, on a timeline that serves existing power structures. Imagine if it had started in 1998. Nearly 30 years of infrastructure, nearly 30 years of research, nearly 30 years of communities, countries, and lives that would no longer be hostage to the price of a barrel. And here may be the most disturbing detail of all. The same corporations that suppressed, ridiculed, and lobbied against clean energy for decades are now the ones profiting from the transition. The same entities that made sure Meyer and inventors like him never reached the finish line are now positioning themselves as heroes of the Green Revolution. The system doesn't just erase the people it considers threats, it waits for the right moment and then claims credit for the future they tried to give us first. Stanley Meyer never received a plaque in Grove City. No memorial, no posthumous recognition, no acknowledgement from the scientific establishment that whatever the limits of his work, he was asking the right question at exactly the right moment. He got a folder with a rubber band and the note, "Natural Causes," and a world that still runs on gasoline. Here is something the system counts on, that you'll hear the story of one man and think maybe he was just a fraud. Maybe this was an isolated case. Maybe the pattern doesn't exist. So let's talk about the pattern, because Stanley Meyer was not the first. He was not the last. And the shape of what happened to him, the invention, the demonstration, the legal assault, the silence, the death had been drawn before. Let's start in 1977. El Paso, Texas. A 24-year-old mechanic named Tom Ogle had been quietly working on something in his garage. No engineering degree, no corporate backing, just a young man who believed, stubbornly and against all advice, that the internal combustion engine was wasting most of the fuel it consumed. He was right. Ogle developed what he called a vapor fuel system, a device that eliminated the conventional carburetor and fuel pump entirely, replacing them with a pressurized tank that fed gasoline vapors directly into the engine's combustion chamber. The principle was simple. Instead of burning liquid fuel inefficiently, burn the fumes. Burn everything. On April 30th, 1977, in front of a journalist from the El Paso Times and a crowd of onlookers, Tom Ogle drove a 1970 Ford Galaxy, a 5,000-pound car with a 460 cubic inch V8 engine, 205 miles on 2 gallons of gasoline. The car was inspected before the drive. Reporters and engineers searched for hidden fuel tanks. None were found. The people who drove with him confirmed they never stopped to refuel. 205 miles, 2 gallons, over 100 miles per gallon. Engineers from the University of Texas examined the system. Their conclusion: this is no hoax. One professor of mechanical engineering stated, and we quote the spirit of his words, "Ogle eliminated the carburetor and achieved what the gasoline engine was supposed to do all along: run on fumes." The story ran on the front page of the El Paso Times. It spread to national publications. It reached the energy committees of both the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives. The U.S. Air Force expressed interest. Oil companies sent representatives. Automotive manufacturers sent engineers. And then the machinery started. The government's own Energy Research and Development Administration dismissed the invention as not practical. The official who made that declaration was later found to have signed a confidentiality agreement that prevented him from explaining his reasoning. He said he couldn't discuss it further. A Shell Oil representative reportedly offered Ogle $20 million for his patent. Ogle refused. He said, and people who were there remember this clearly, that Shell would simply bury the technology and it would never be seen again. He was right about that, too. In the summer of 1981, Ogle was shot outside a bar in El Paso. He survived, but told people afterward that armed men had been following him and that they were after his patent. Months later, on August 19, 1981, Tom Ogle was found dead. He was 26 years old. The official cause: accidental overdose of alcohol and a painkiller called Darvin, a drug he had no documented history of using and no documented reason to need. His technology disappeared. His prototype disappeared. His documentation disappeared. 3 months after his death, the original plans filed with the Patent Office in Washington vanished from the records. U.S. Patent number 409779, Ogle's fuel system, still technically exists in the public domain. You can read the abstract. But the invention it describes has never been independently replicated under controlled conditions. And the man who built it is gone. Now go back further, much further, 901. Long Island, New York. And before I go any further, if the name I'm about to say means something to you, good. If it doesn't, even better, because this channel has already gone deep on this story. There is a full video dedicated entirely to this man. After you finish watching this one, go find it. Search for his name on this channel. You'll understand why I'm telling you that now. Nikola Tesla, the man who gave us alternating current, the electrical system that powers every home on Earth, was building a tower. Not a radio tower, not a communications tower, something far more radical. Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower was designed to transmit electrical power wirelessly through the Earth itself. No cables, no meters, no bills, energy distributed freely to anyone with a receiver anywhere on the planet. His primary financial backer was J.P. Morgan, one of the most powerful men in the world. Morgan had invested $150,000, but as Tesla's ambitions for the tower expanded beyond wireless communication and into free power transmission, Morgan understood what the technology would mean for his empire. Morgan controlled enormous stakes in the existing electrical grid, the wires, the generators, the billing systems, the infrastructure that charged people every month for electricity. Free wireless power would destroy all of it. Morgan refused to invest further. He refused to allow Tesla to seek funding elsewhere. The project collapsed. By 1917, the tower was demolished, torn down, and sold for scrap to satisfy Tesla's debts. Tesla died alone in a New York hotel room in 1943. He was 86. He died in debt. The patents that had made Westinghouse and Morgan wealthy, patents built on Tesla's own genius, had never made Tesla rich. The night Tesla died, agents from the Office of Alien Property seized all of his papers, notebooks, and research files. The FBI reviewed them. Most were eventually released, but not all. Some files remain classified to this day. A man who rewired civilization died broke. His final research confiscated by the government. 3 names, 3 different eras, 3 different technologies, 3 different mechanisms of suppression. Tesla, starved of funding, stripped of recognition, papers seized, Ogle shot, dead at 26. Technology vanished. Meyer, convicted of fraud, died in a parking lot, car sealed and hidden. The tools change. The outcome doesn't. If you've been paying attention, you've noticed something. These stories don't end the same way, but they follow the same steps. Let's map it. Step 1. The invention works, at least partially, at least enough to attract serious attention. There are witnesses. There are demonstrations. There are engineers who walk away saying something real is happening here. This is the dangerous moment. Not because the invention is proven, it isn't yet, but because the potential is visible. The threat is real enough to require a response. Step 2. The discrediting begins. It doesn't need to be total. It just needs to be loud enough and official enough to create doubt. A government agency says it's not practical. A physicist says it violates thermodynamics. A court says it's fraud. The qualifier gets attached to every future mention of the inventor's name. Step 3. The funding dries up. This is perhaps the most elegant weapon in the system's arsenal. You don't need to prove the technology doesn't work. You just need to make sure no one can afford to prove that it does. Legal costs, regulatory barriers, investor skepticism manufactured by the discrediting campaign. Any combination works. The inventor becomes isolated. The lab closes. The team disperses. Step 4, the documentation disappears. Patents expire and enter the public domain. But the critical implementation details were never in the patents to begin with. Prototypes are seized, sold, or simply vanish. Film footage is lost. The Argosy magazine article about Tom Ogle's invention disappeared from the Library of Congress. The El Paso TV station that filmed his test drive lost the footage. Meyer's buggy was sealed in a room. Tesla's papers were confiscated. Step 5, the inventor is gone. Sometimes through death, sometimes through complete professional destruction, sometimes through a legal judgment that reduces 20 years of documented work to a single phrase, declared fraudulent by a court. And step 6, the one nobody talks about, is the waiting. Because here is the coldest truth in all of these stories. The technology doesn't disappear forever. It gets absorbed, it gets repackaged, it gets renamed, and it gets commercialized. Slowly, expensively on a timeline controlled by the same interests that suppressed it. Tesla's wireless power transmission is now called WPT, wireless power transfer. It charges your phone. It powers electric toothbrushes. Researchers at MIT, NASA, and multiple defense contractors are actively developing long-range versions for drones, satellites, and remote infrastructure. The market for wireless power technology is projected to exceed $60 billion by 2030. Tom Ogle's vaporized fuel principle, burning fumes rather than liquid, is the core concept. Behind modern direct injection engines and advanced fuel atomization systems, every major automaker uses derivatives of this idea. The patents they hold on these systems are worth billions. Stanley Meyer's hydrogen electrolysis work is now called green hydrogen technology and is the centerpiece of the energy transition strategies of the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and the United States. The ideas were real enough to steal. They were just too disruptive to allow to exist on the inventor's terms. Now think about what this means for the present. Right now, today, there are researchers working in laboratories on energy technologies that could, if scaled, fundamentally disrupt the existing energy infrastructure. Some of them have already filed patents. Some have already demonstrated results that established science struggles to fully explain. Some are already receiving pressure from regulators, from investors with conflicted interests, from institutions that have everything to lose. Most of them will never make the news. Their names will not become legends. Their stories will not find their way into a documentary, a YouTube channel, or a Wikipedia page. They will simply stop. And a decade later, the technology they were working on will appear, rebranded, repackaged, owned by someone else as the next great corporate innovation. That is the machine. It runs continuously. It ran before Meyer. It ran before Ogle. It ran before Tesla, and understanding how it works, really understanding it, not as conspiracy theory, but as documented pattern, is the first step towards something the system has always feared more than any single invention. It fears an informed public that refuses to look away. Every story on this channel follows the same pattern. A person, an idea, a system that felt threatened, and an erasure. Sometimes the erasure is death. Sometimes it's discrediting. Sometimes it's the silent suffocation of a career, a reputation, a technology. But the pattern is the same, because the people in power have learned that the easiest way to control the future is to erase the people who are building it. Stanley Meyer was not perfect. No person is. He was brilliant and paranoid, visionary and closed off, determined and afraid. He was a human being carrying something larger than himself, in a world with every financial incentive in the universe to make sure he failed. He asked a question that should have changed everything. Why do we keep burning the world when water covers 70% of it? That question did not die in a parking lot in Ohio. It lives in every hydrogen fuel cell vehicle on the road today, in every clean energy laboratory, in every engineer who looks at a water molecule and sees a different future. The system erased the man, but it could not erase the question, and that's why we're here. That's why this channel exists, because the true unseen key is not just an engine patent or a technical secret. The true key is your consciousness. When you understand that the energy Meyer sought in the water is the same energy that flows through you, an infinite and vibrant source, the system loses its grip on your fear. Every time the system erases someone, it bets that nobody will look, that nobody will dig, that the story will stay buried, and that you will continue to believe that scarcity is the only possible reality. We're here to prove that bet is wrong. One story at a time, one key at a time, unlock your mind. Heal your perception. The door is open. If you made it this far, you are exactly who this channel was built for. You don't accept the first answer. You want the full picture. You understand that the most important stories are the ones powerful people hope you never find. That is the unseen key. Every video we make is a key to a door that someone locked on purpose. Subscribe right now. Hit the bell, because the next person whose story we're going to tell, you need to know who they are before their name gets buried too. Leave a like. It seems small, but it isn't. It's how this information escapes the algorithm that wants to keep it quiet. Every like is a signal. This truth deserves to be seen. Share this video with someone who has never heard the name Stanley Meyer, because the most powerful thing you can do against a system that buries stories is refuse to let them stay buried. And in the comments, tell me, do you think the technology was real? Do you think he was silenced? Or is the truth somewhere more complicated than either of those two answers? I read every comment, and this conversation matters. The key is in your hand. One more thing. In this video, I mentioned Nikola Tesla, and I only gave you a fraction of his story. Look up Tesla on the Unseen Key. Watch that video. Because once you see the full picture of what happened to him, and then go back to what happened to Meyer, Ogle, and the others, the pattern becomes impossible not to notice. That video is waiting for you. Just like the next key, use it.